At several points throughout wartime history, the Railroad-Altoona shops and Horseshoe Curve's reputation was so prominent that they actually became targeted for destruction. At this point, not only was the Pennsy shipping coal, iron, and steel for continued industrial expansion across the country, it was also shipping soldiers, supplies, and armaments to support the wars that occurred. The goal of the enemy combatant was always the same: destroy the railroad, destroy the war effort.
One of the things that surprises a lot of people is that the PRR shops here in Altoona were actually under threat by the Confederacy during the Civil War. You think about 1863, specifically the summer of 1863, the Confederate Army under Robert E. Lee was slowly making its way up north, and there were real fears in southern and central Pennsylvania that should the Confederacy be victorious in any battle that may occur around that region, they could come up here to Altoona and take control of the PRR shops, which, throughout their prime were kind of one of the industrial hubs of the United States. So there were fears that if the Confederacy got a hold of these PRR shops and either used them for their own means or destroyed them, that was going to be a significant domino that would fall against the North and their operations during the Civil War. And as a result of this, precautions were taken to prepare Altoona, Blair County, southern Pennsylvania for a Confederate invasion. And indeed, the PRR shops were prepared for that as well. Drills were held for evacuation measures during this time. And right around the Battle of Gettysburg, I believe just a week or so beforehand, there were such fears that the Confederates would come into our area here that supplies were actually evacuated out of the PRR shops here in Altoona. So in a lot of ways, much like later conflicts, the PRR served as one of the industrial tools that would really serve the Union well during the war. And if we lost that, if the North lost those industrial tools, there were real concerns over whether the war could be continued or not. Had the Confederacy actually been able to come up here and either A, capture Altoona, or B, at the very least, disrupt the operations of the Pennsylvania Railroad in this area, up to and including the destruction of the shops and the facilities, there is that question of whether Altoona could have continued as a town. That's one of the interesting what-ifs that we like to discuss here.
Horseshoe Curve, being an engineering marvel, was known throughout the world, and the German Abwehr, which is their version of the CIA during World War II, developed a plan to send saboteurs to the United States to destroy military targets and some civilian targets that would be detrimental to the war effort. Aluminum factories were on the list, hydroelectric plants, and the Altoona works of the Pennsylvania Railroad, because of their ability to repair and build freight cars, and the Horseshoe Curve was a primary target for them. The Germans were certainly aware of the Horseshoe Curve for two reasons. One, it had become a worldwide known engineering marvel for the ability to get trains over the mountain. And it should be noted the Germans had spies here in the United States who were well aware of what facilities were being used to produce materials for the war and what facilities were being used to transport them to the front lines. And speaking specifically for the Pennsylvania Railroad, 90% of the freight produced in the United States for the European war effort came through the Pennsylvania main line. It stretched as far as St. Louis and Chicago. So all these war materials coming through Horseshoe Curve, if they could blow that up, it was really a convenient spot to create a logjam of supplies. The Germans invested a great deal of money and resources in a submarine operation along the eastern seaboard to sink ships. But there would be no ships if you could shut down the supplies of material getting to the eastern seaboard. This Operation Pastorius, they called it, for the first German immigrant to the United States, sent two four-man teams. One four-man team landed on Long Island in New York. The other four-man team landed in Florida. They had explosives, including explosives made to look like pieces of coal so they could plant them along the rail line. And they also had $80,000, which is the beginning of their problem, because about 6 of the 8 were not really faithful Nazis. There were 2 that were faithful Nazis. The other 6 were really looking for a way to get out. They had all lived in the United States, so when they got here with $80,000, going to restaurants and entertainment was a lot more appealing than blowing things up and risking their lives. So 2 of the men, George Dash and Ernst Berger, met in a hotel room, and Dash said to Berger, if we don't agree on this, only one of us is going to walk out of this room. And Dash revealed to him that he wanted to turn the plot into the FBI and thought it would make him a hero. So he went to a telephone and called the FBI. They thought it was a prank call. And he had actually traveled to Washington to the FBI building there, where he turned the whole plot in. And they were arrested and put on trial. The 6 that did not turn themselves in were eventually executed as saboteurs. The other 2, Berger and Dash, they were sentenced to life in prison, but after the war they were sent back to Germany, but they weren't really welcome in Germany because they viewed them as traitors, and they weren't welcome here because we saw them as spies and saboteurs. So they didn't end up the heroes they thought they would be. The entire situation during the war, even when the war broke out, the federal government required alien German and Italians to register with the federal government. Here in the city of Altoona, the Altoona Police Department collected guns, binoculars, radios, and things from them. Even with that, there was still spying and going on. There was a pilot from Blair County that was shot down. And when he was interrogated by the Germans, they had information on his school record that had appeared in the Altoona Mirror. So somehow they were getting these stories that were local news stories back in Germany during the war. And after Operation Pastorius had been stopped and the men were arrested, the FBI came and did a series of raids on 175 homes in Altoona, searching those homes for various contraband. If there were radios, they smashed the insides of the radios because it didn't take much technological know-how to convert the radio to a 2-way radio. So there was a great deal of concern for safety and security during the war. Even the federal government prohibited the taking of photographs of trains because they were carrying war materials on them. And if you look at photographs from the war, you see lots of passenger cars, you see lots of box cars, but you don't see many of the flat cars that were hauling tanks and half tracks and trucks and things like that, just for the security of the war effort.